0714, east of Vovchansk, in the Kharkiv Oblast sector. A Russian Orlan-10 reconnaissance drone climbs through the pre-dawn gray, its twin-boom silhouette catching the first light before the artillery brigades below have finished their morning tea. The launch is textbook. The flight path is textbook. The time, 0714, almost to the second, is also textbook. It has been textbook for weeks. Below, along a ridgeline that Ukrainian forces have held through winter cold and weeks of grinding Russian pressure, a counter-battery radar team is already awake. They are not watching the Orlan. They stopped watching the Orlan days ago. They are watching the clock. Here is what perfect routine looks like from the other side of the front line. It looks like a targeting solution. This is the story of how a Russian recon sortie became its own worst enemy, and how a pre-planned HIMARS strike, timed not to the drone but to the artillery battery the drone was flying for, erased a key Russian fire support node east of Vovchansk in under 4 minutes. The Orlan made it home. The guns did not. The Vovchansk sector has been one of the most contested stretches of the northeastern front in recent months. Russian forces pushed hard through this corridor in an earlier offensive surge, crossing the border and establishing a shallow salient that Ukrainian defenders have since compressed from 3 sides. The ground is mixed, patches of dense tree line broken by open agricultural fields, a network of rural roads that become impassable mud in thaw, and a ridgeline that offers observation across several kilometers of the Russian-held approach. Whoever holds the ridge sees the artillery. Whoever controls the artillery shapes the battle. Russia's fire support doctrine in this sector has been consistent. Orlan-10 drones fly Overwatch at dawn, spotting for 2 S-19 MEMSTA-BS self-propelled howitzers and, in some confirmed instances, older towed D-20 guns positioned in tree lines 2 to 4 kilometers behind the contact line. The Orlan-10 is a reliable platform, roughly $100,000 per unit by Western estimates, capable of carrying electro-optical and infrared cameras, and able to loiter for up to 18 hours on a single fuel load. It is not a precision weapon, it is an eye. And in the Vovchansk sector, it had become a very punctual eye. Ukrainian signals intelligence, operating under conditions they do not publicize, began logging the Orlan's launch times in the second week of its pattern. The drone was departing from the same approximate grid, a field staging area roughly 8 kilometers northeast of the contact line, at intervals so consistent that a stopwatch could confirm them. 0714, or within 90 seconds of it, every morning that weather permitted. The flight path curved east, then south, then looped back over the ridge, giving the Russian fire control team a line-of-sight update on Ukrainian positions before the first artillery mission of the day. What the Ukrainian team understood, after enough mornings of watching, was something the Russian brigade had almost certainly not considered. The drone's launch time was not just a data point, it was a window into the artillery battery's firing schedule. Russian counter-battery doctrine tends toward rigid sequencing. The reconnaissance asset goes up, the fire control team gets its data, and the first artillery mission follows within a predictable window. Open-source analysis of Russian fire patterns in the broader Kharkiv Oblast theater, documented by researchers tracking geolocated strike footage, puts that window at roughly 20 to 35 minutes after the recon asset reaches its observation altitude. The Orlan lifted at 0714. The guns typically opened at 0738 to 0745. Ukraine's counter-battery crews, specifically the HIMARS-equipped units rotating through the northeastern sector, had a system built for exactly this kind of predictability. The M142 HIMARS, a wheeled multiple-launch rocket system supplied by the United States, fires GMLR's guided rockets with a range of approximately 70 kilometers and a circular error probable of less than 5 meters. A single 6-round pod costs roughly $500,000. A single GMLR's rocket costs approximately $160,000. These are not cheap weapons. But against a Russian howitzer battery, which represents anywhere from $2 million to $6 million in equipment value, plus the trained crew that takes months or years to replace, the math is straightforward. The harder part is not the munitions cost. The harder part is finding the battery. Russian artillery units operating in the Vovchansk sector had learned, through painful experience, to limit their emissions and move frequently. Ukraine's general staff has repeatedly highlighted Russian counter-battery evasion as a growing operational challenge. Russian crews sometimes fire a handful of rounds, then relocate before a return strike can reach them. The shoot-and-scoot tactic is not new, but it depends on the shooter not being pre-located before the shooting starts. What if the battery's position was already known? That is the question the Ukrainian ISR team had spent the better part of 2 weeks answering. The Orlan's flight path was consistent enough that its general origin point, and by extension, the artillery it was flying for, could be narrowed by working backward from the drone's observed behavior. When the Orlan corrected fire on day 1, where did the subsequent impacts land? Cross-referenced with the drone's position during the correction, that gave a bearing. Repeated over multiple days, the bearings converged on a tree line northeast of Vovchansk, consistent with satellite imagery showing disturbed Earth and vehicle track patterns. OSINT analysts working from publicly available imagery flagged the same area within days of the Ukrainian ground team's assessment. 2 independent methods. 1 answer: the battery was not moving. It was firing from the same position each morning, a mistake that open-source analysts had already flagged as symptomatic of Russian logistical constraints in this sector. Moving a howitzer battery means fuel, coordination, and a new registration process for the guns. In a theater where Russian fuel supply lines have been under sustained Ukrainian interdiction, some units are simply staying put and hoping the volume of their own fire provides sufficient suppression. Here is the part that does not make sense on the surface. Ukraine chose not to strike the battery on the first morning they had high confidence in its location, or the second. They waited 3 more days. The reason involves both HIMARS availability and a deliberate choice to verify the battery's continued presence before committing munitions. HIMARS units in Ukraine operate under strict fire discipline. The rockets are precise but not infinite, and every launch reveals the launch vehicle's approximate position to Russian radar. A HIMARS launch in the wrong sector, or against a battery that has relocated, wastes munitions, and potentially exposes the launcher. The Ukrainian fire planning cell cross-referenced the imagery data one more time the evening before the strike, confirmed vehicle thermal signatures in the tree line matching a self-propelled howitzer battery in hide position, and locked the coordinates. The pre-planned strike was tied to a trigger, the Orlan-10 launch. Not because the drone was the target, it was not, but because the drone's 0714 departure was the most reliable indicator that the battery was active, crewed, and preparing to fire. Once the Orlan was up, the battery was committed for the next 45 minutes to an hour. It would not move until its morning fire mission was complete. That window was the strike window. On the morning in question, the Orlan lifted at 0716, 2 minutes late, which the Ukrainian team noted and logged without concern. Within 4 minutes of confirmed drone launch, the HIMARS fire mission was authorized. The M142 launcher, operating from a position well behind the Ukrainian line, already laid on the pre-planned coordinates, executed a ripple of 4 GMLRS rockets. Time of flight for a GMLRS at that range is approximately 45 to 60 seconds per rocket. The battery had no warning. Russian short-range air defense in this sector has been assessed by Western analysts as degraded. Multiple Tor and Buk systems have been confirmed lost in the Kharkiv Oblast area by Oryx's open-source tracker, which documents only those losses with visual confirmation, and the GML-RS, flying a depressed ballistic trajectory at high speed, is a difficult intercept regardless. The first 2 rockets impacted the tree line in the battery's hide position. Open-source drone footage, uploaded to Ukrainian military channels within hours and geolocated by OSINT researchers, showed secondary explosions consistent with propellant or ammunition cook-off, a tall column of gray-white smoke rising from the tree line, then a second, lower detonation that analysts assessed as an ammunition resupply vehicle or cache co-located with the guns. The 3rd and 4th rockets impacted in a staggered pattern across the position. The battery's radar and communication signatures, monitored by Ukrainian signals intelligence, went silent within seconds of the first impact and did not return. If you track this war seriously, you already recognize this pattern: the pre-planned strike, the trigger-based launch authorization, the ISR cross-referencing. Subscribe to Silent Echo. We break down a new frontline engagement every week, because the tactical details that determine the outcome of this war rarely make the headline summaries. What happened to the Orlan-10? It completed its mission, transmitted its corrections, and returned to its staging area, where it landed to find that the battery it had been flying for no longer existed. Ukrainian forces did not attempt to down the drone. A $100,000 recon platform is a relevant loss, but it was not the objective. The objective was the artillery. The drone, by surviving, may have carried back telemetry and video that Russian fire control will eventually use to request a replacement battery. But that battery will arrive into a sector where Ukraine now has a documented, confirmed track record of pre-planned counter-battery strikes, which suppresses how boldly replacement units will position themselves. Battle damage assessment, as reported through Ukrainian military sources and corroborated by open-source imagery analysis, at least 2 self-propelled howitzers confirmed destroyed in the tree line, with a third showing fire damage in subsequent imagery. A vehicle assessed as a logistics truck, likely associated with ammunition resupply, also confirmed destroyed. Russian blogger channels, which have become an inadvertent open-source intelligence resource due to their frank internal commentary, noted the loss of a fire support element in the sector without specifying the cause, which is itself a confirmation pattern OSINT analysts have learned to read. Here is what this case actually shows. The Russian brigade was not defeated by superior technology. Ukraine's HIMARS and the Orlan-10 are in many respects roughly matched in what they represent. ISR paired with fires, a combination both sides employ. What destroyed the Russian battery was institutional rigidity. The decision to fly the same drone at the same time on the same route for weeks, almost certainly driven by crew habit, scheduling friction, and a command culture that rewards compliance over adaptation, turned a tactical asset into a liability. The drone became the advertisement for the battery it was supposed to protect. Put yourself in the position of the Russian battery commander that morning. He has been operating from the same hide for weeks. His Orlan has been flying every dawn. His guns have been firing their morning missions. Nothing bad has happened. This is the danger of operational routine. In a war where the other side has persistent ISR, signals intelligence, and precision fires, the absence of punishment is not proof of concealment. It may simply mean the punishment is being prepared. If you follow the tactical evolution of this war, you see this lesson being learned, contested, and relearned on both sides. The side that adapts faster to the cost of predictability keeps its equipment and its crews. Right now, Ukraine's general staff reports that Russian armored and artillery losses continue to accumulate. Oryx's open-source confirmed count has passed 3,000 Russian tanks destroyed or captured since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, with artillery systems adding a separate column that runs into the thousands of individual pieces. These are not invented numbers. They are the minimum confirmed by visual evidence, which means the real total is higher. The pattern of how those losses happen is shifting. Early in the war, many losses came from direct contact, ambushes, anti-tank missile engagements, minefield strikes. More recently, open-source analysts document an increasing share of Russian artillery and support vehicle losses attributable to pre-planned counter-battery fire and deep strikes, exactly the category this engagement represents. Ukraine is not just defending, it is systematically hunting the infrastructure of Russian fire support. The Vovchansk sector, in this context, is one node in a larger operational picture. Russia has made several attempts to push through the Kharkiv Oblast border corridor in recent months, with limited and costly territorial gains. Ukrainian forces, smaller in number and under sustained pressure, have relied on exactly the kind of ISR fires integration this engagement illustrates, making every Russian predictability a potential targeting solution, stretching Russian logistics by forcing equipment losses that cannot be quickly replaced. The Orlan-10 the following morning, according to open-source monitoring of the sector's UAV activity patterns, either did not fly or flew a significantly different route. The lesson, at the tactical level, had apparently been received. Whether the replacement battery will make the same mistake is an open question. Russian fire support units in this sector continue to operate, continue to fly recon drones, and continue to shell Ukrainian positions. The war does not pause for tactical lessons. Here is the question this engagement leaves open, and it is worth sitting with. At what point does the operational cost of routine exceed its tactical benefit? Routine is not inherently a mistake. It conserves mental energy, reduces coordination friction, and makes large organizations function. But in a war where the other side has learned to treat every consistent behavior as intelligence, routine without variation is a targeting solution. The Russian brigade that flew its Orlan at 07:14 every morning was not negligent in some obvious way. It was following a sequence that had worked, repeatedly, without consequence, until it did not. That inflection point, between "this is working" and "this is being used against us," is invisible from inside the pattern. The Ukrainian counter-battery teams understood something fundamental. In a war of persistent observation, it is not the weapon that wins. It is the behavior of the force wielding it. Perfect precision is irrelevant if the target moves. Perfect routine is irrelevant if the enemy sets their clock by it. The Orlan climbed at 0714. The HIMARS fired before the morning mission began. The battery is gone. The ridge is still Ukrainian. What do you think? Will Russian artillery units in this sector adapt their launch timing and position discipline? Or will the structural constraints of their logistics force them back into predictable patterns? Comment below. We read every response, and the operational picture in the Kharkiv Oblast corridor is developing fast enough that your read on this matters. We covered a Ukrainian drone strike on Russian defense industry infrastructure in the Volga region in a recent video. The industrial targeting logic connects directly to what you just watched. That link is in the description.